Hello everyone, welcome to HIM 216. This lecture will cover Chapter 6 in your textbook. And as a reminder, when you log into 3M and you get to this patient information page, you're always going to click on the 10. You see it says ICD-10 CM-PCS. You are not going to click on the 9. This is ICD-9. That is not what we are coding, so we are going to always click on the 10. Now, when we when the codebook opens, we are going to choose procedures, and that will actually take us into ICD-10 PCS. And remember that I've told you that with ICD-10, CM is actually one book and PCS is another book. So in reality, they are two different books. When we're looking at the structure of the procedural coding system, and when you first go into it, it always comes up with this 3F because there is a there's this letter before the actual there's this number before the letters of the alphabet begin, and so I just always click on the A. It makes it look easier and easier to comprehend. So the way that the procedural coding system, the book, is set up is that there is an index and then there is a table. The left-hand side is the index, the right-hand side is the table. In PCS, all codes are 7 characters. There is no period. The distinction between CM and PCS is that when you are looking at a CM code, it can be from 3 to 7 characters in length. And if it's more than 3 characters, there's always a period behind the third character, and then 1 to 4 additional characters. In PCS, it's always 7 characters. The letter O is not used in PCS. It's always the number 0. So be very careful when you're writing these PCS codes and when you're typing in answers, and do not type an O in place of a 0. When we're using the index, they continually refine this index and make it more and more coder friendly. When you're looking up codes, you may be able to find a code based on how it's typically called. For instance, an appendectomy. We don't say that, oh, we're doing a resection of the appendix. Typically, we say we're doing an appendectomy. And as a matter of fact, if I go in to look up appendectomy, I can see that I have a couple of options based on the root operation, and you'll study those in detail. And then based on whether or not it was an excision or a resection, I click on the code and it takes me to the table, and I fill in the missing characters. And we'll talk about the meaning of all of these characters as well. So you can, one of the unique things about the procedural coding system is that you can code directly from the table. You don't have to use the index. But I'm going to tell you that most of the time, not always, but most of the time, it's easier to use the index to help you get started. It will send you to the correct table, and then once you get to the table, you can see which characters you need. And in this case, you need the approach. That's not completed. That's the only thing I have to pop in here. And I know the approach from reading the report of operation, and then I have my complete code. This is much easier than having to go through all of the options in the table, but we'll actually do that with some codes as well. if I put in episiotomy, the table gives me the first 4 characters, but when I actually click on it, the index gives me the first 4 characters, but when I pop on it and it takes me to the table, it completely fills in that code for me. So we'll look at different examples of that. In your textbook, Chapter 6 begins on page 93. And in this book, I'm going to be lecturing you on the format, what the different characters mean. You're going to have to study the root operations. They begin on page 98. We'll go over these in more detail in Chapter 8, but for the purposes of your assignments for Chapter 6, you're more focused on learning the definitions of these root operations and how they are grouped together. And then you're also going to be focusing on the coding guidelines for Chapter 6. And you're going to be answering the questions in Table 6-3. You're going to be doing Chapter Exercise 6-3, those odd-numbered questions. You're also going to be completing Chapter Exercise 6-6, those odd-numbered questions, and then you have the chapter review questions and the workbook questions. And we will go over those. This is really very much a reading, self-directed chapter because it's familiarizing yourself with these root operations and with those coding guidelines. So I'm really torn about how many lectures to record because you really need to be focusing on that information, which you need to be reading in the textbook. But we will have at least 2 lectures for this chapter. And I can tell you that for the questions for this lecture, I want you to look at exercise 6-1. And I want you to answer question 9. And remember that a cholecystectomy is a procedure code. So we're not talking about clicking on the diagnosis tab. We're talking about being in the procedure tab and looking up cholecystectomy. And then I want you to do 11. So 9 and 11 for this particular lecture. Okay, so let's get started. In your book on page 93, I think it's important for you to understand that CMS, in conjunction with 3M, actually designed this procedural coding system. It's not part of the World Healthcare Organization's system. It is strictly specific to the United States, and they maintain it. When we are looking, I want you to look on page 94. And at the bottom of the page, it talks about the different characters that are used as a part of this coding system. Every character has a meaning, and it's important to understand the what these meanings are. The first character, which is very broad, is called the section. And primarily, you will be using codes from the medical surgical section. We will do some coding from the obstetrics. We'll do some from placement and administration, extracorporeal assistance and performance. However, once we get to osteopathic, remember that the procedural coding system is used for inpatient procedures. And these from 7 to all the way to H, typically these are not procedures that are performed on inpatients that we would use an ICD-10 code for. Osteopathic procedures are typically not done in an inpatient setting, neither is chiropractic. When it comes to imaging, nuclear med, radiation therapy, physical rehab, we use CPT codes from the charge master for all of these, not PCS codes. Mental health codes would be specific to a mental health facility. Now, and this includes I encourage you to go in and look at all of these, but you'll see that here this includes all kinds of psychological testing, psychotherapy, group therapy. Again, these are typically coded using CPT codes. Substance abuse treatment, substance abuse therapy. Now, if you're in a facility that is doing detox and rehab, yes, you may use these particular codes. There are the detox. This is the code for detox. And the counseling typically goes to the to group counseling, which is typically 12-step, and those are typically, they're not done in an acute care hospital. They are done in a detox rehab facility. So many of these we actually won't even cover. They'll be covered in your book. I won't lecture you on them. You won't be tested on them because they're just not something typically that we're going to use. New technology will be here, and I would not expect you as a new coder to be applying these codes. And when this new technology comes into a facility, usually there is a lot of focus on exactly how to code these to make sure that the facility is appropriately reimbursed. So you can go in and look at these and look around at them, and at least you will be familiar with them. So I'm going to click on medical surgical because that's the section that we are going to work in most. All medical surgical codes start with a 0, not the letter O, with a 0. And then the second character is based on the body system, and you can see that this is it's broken down by body system. So you got to know where your the structure that the procedure was performed on. You have to know what body system it was located in. And it does differentiate between central and peripheral nervous systems, so you need to know the difference in those. And then you can read through these. I'm not going to read all of these to you. One of the areas that when I'm doing examples that I spend a lot of time is gastrointestinal, because there are so many root operations applicable to this particular body system. Not all root operations are performed in every body system. There are more performed in gastrointestinal than there are in any other body system. For instance, if we are having a sex change operation, that particular root operation is creation, and about the only time that we will find that root operation is if we are in, let me see if this is the right place. Is if we go to anatomic region general, we will find creation as a root operation here, and literally this is when you're taking a male perineum and you're creating a vagina, or a female perineum and you're creating a penis. And this is the only time that the root operation of creation is used. If we go into any of the other body systems, we're not going to find that root operation used. So these are in medical, surgical, in the central nervous system, these are the root operations. Now, I want to point something out to you. Anytime you're in the table and you see a question mark, you can actually click on that question mark, and it pops up a little box that will give you a description of the items that are actually in that that area. So it's not every root operation, it's just the root operations that are specific to the central nervous system. Now I'm going to pull up gastrointestinal, and I'm just going to choose excision. It's a very common procedure because I want to show you these. If I click on this question mark for approach, it'll come up with the descriptions of approach, not for device or qualifier because there really aren't any options there. So anytime you see that question mark, you can click on that. The third character in any code is the root operation. Now, the root operations are included in your textbook beginning on page 98. And every PCS procedure will have a root operation. And it's very important to understand the definitions of these root operations. So, as I said, we'll go over those in much more detail in Chapter 8. We'll actually apply them in Chapter 8, but the definitions are here, so you need to be very familiar with these definitions. The fourth character is the body part, and this is actually the part of the body that the procedure was performed on. And so again, this comes from understanding surgical procedures, learning the medical terminology, reading the actual operative report, and basically just practicing. Our fifth character is the approach. Approach is very important. Was this an open procedure? And when you click on the little question mark here, it gives you the definition of these particular approaches, and then they're also discussed in your textbook on page 102. These are note card type things. You always, you always want to come back and review the approach to remind yourself of what approach you're going to be choosing. When you look at the guidelines, you'll see, for instance, that external, if someone has a closed fracture and pressure is placed on that bone to put it back into alignment, that's external. If a patient is having a tonsillectomy, that's considered to be external because they're going in through the mouth. And that the approach is just considered to be external. I don't know why it's not via natural opening, but it's not. It's external. And we can go in here. And if we, we'll do a resection because usually they take out the entire tonsil. It does have other options for, well, let's see, it does have other options here for approaches, but we will use external. The sixth character in a code is the device. There's a specific definition for a device. A device actually has to stay, it has to remain in the body. Devices are discussed on page 105 in your textbook. And then the final character is the qualifier, and it can change based on the whatever the body part is and the procedure that you're performing. Many times the qualifier is a character of Z, which basically is no qualifier. That's going to conclude this first lecture for Chapter 6. If you have any questions, please let me know.